Hi, this is my very first bedtime stories for Instagram, and I wanted to start off at the beginning really. Um, this particular bedtime story is entitled Pregnancy After Miscarriage. Um, as you probably know from looking at my page, I have one baby called Oren, who's now 5 months old. But he was actually conceived only about 4 or 5 weeks after I had a miscarriage. And that miscarriage was actually my first ever pregnancy. It was very early on. I think I was only about 6 weeks pregnant, and we'd only known for about 2 or 3 weeks that I was pregnant. But it was a really big experience, and one which I guess now that I have a baby, I don't think about that often. Certainly don't dwell on it that often, but have never really talked about at any great length ever since. And that's partly because, thankfully, I got pregnant so quickly afterwards and had Oren. But I felt like it was important, I guess, to make this my first bedtime story on my Instagram feed. I guess in a way to honour whatever seed of a soul that little future baby would have been or had. People think about miscarried babies or embryos in different ways, and I guess some people, I guess rightly think that maybe it just was never meant to be. And if you look at it from a medical point of view, quite often there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with your fertility, there's nothing wrong with your future babies, but that particular one, in terms of that embryo, just wasn't a viable embryo and was never actually destined to go full term, and therefore was one of those things, as they say. And other people see it differently, and I suppose I see it in all the different ways that you can see it. For me, when I really think about it, it does feel like there was a soul of a person or a baby that was there even for just those few short weeks. Because it was, after all, it was the start of a life. And for me, that's important to acknowledge. And I think for a lot of women, who have gone through this, I think it's important for them to acknowledge it too. And despite the tears, you can still feel happiness for that soul or that start of the life that was around, even for a short time. One of my good friends, who has also suffered 2 miscarriages, has quite a spiritual outlook on the whole thing, and she believes that the little babies that she lost had chosen to come to her, and had chosen to come to her for that short amount of time, just because they wanted to hear and feel her heartbeat. They wanted to live inside a human body for that time and hear that heartbeat and feel it. And you know what? I think whatever you believe, and whether you're somebody who thinks what a load of old rubbish, which admittedly sometimes I do think that, because I swing from, you know, being quite pragmatic and medical about it all, and then, but then you can't deny how you feel. And if you feel really emotional and you feel connected to something that you feel was a living thing, then that can't be denied. And actually, if it's of comfort to you and it's of comfort to those people who have been affected by miscarriage, then I don't see that there's anything wrong with however you want to package it and however you want to believe and remember that soul, or that start of a life, as I call it. For me, that pregnancy, that short pregnancy, actually was very different to the pregnancy that I had with Oren. In many ways, it was positive, but I was also very, very anxious for those couple of weeks that I was pregnant. Really, really anxious about what could happen, and going over and over in my mind, you know, what had happened to some of my friends and that they'd had miscarriages. I also felt physically very different to my pregnancy with Oren, and I wonder, looking back, whether that was because the embryo had never really properly taken inside me, and the hormones levels weren't conducive to a full-time pregnancy. Who knows? I can't really say, and I wouldn't want to, because every pregnancy is different and everybody feels different in every pregnancy. But for me, I definitely feel like the two were quite different. But overall, I was really happy, and I remember that time fondly. And I also felt much more confident in myself as well. I had a lot more respect for my body and for other women's bodies too, what we can do. And I guess the aim of this video is for anyone out there who has gone through the same thing, just to share, really. I remember when one of my friends had a miscarriage. This was long before I ever got pregnant, and in those circumstances you think, what on earth can I say, what can I do? And there's no right thing to say, is there? But all I could do was feel how she must have been feeling, and just share that with her. You know, I think I called her and she didn't pick up, but I just left a voicemail and just said, you know, I'm here and I'm feeling something of what you're feeling. I'm really, really sad. And she could hear in my voice on the voicemail that I was sad, because I started crying. But I just let it be. I didn't try to be anything. I didn't try to stop feeling sad. I just wanted her to know that I was there. And I was feeling her sadness and her loss with her. And I guess that's probably all that you can do if someone's going through this. What I also felt or found really, really helpful, which isn't necessarily what every woman going through this would want, but I did find it helpful to hear messages of hope and to hear people say that that I would go on to have a baby, and that I was a mother. That for me helped. I remember one of the midwives or the nurses in the hospital where I went to have the miscarriage was absolutely wonderful, and could see how upset I was. And instead of just being really clinical, like you would expect her to be, and like most of the staff were, which is fine, they had to be, she just gave me a big hug, held my hands really, really tight, and just said that she knew how I felt, and and that we would go on to have a baby, that, you know, that I was a mum and that we would have a baby. And it was such a personal experience, and it really helped. So for me, that was a good thing. What I would also say is another thing that's been a comfort to me is keeping some things that I had at that time of the pregnancy that remind me of that time. So if you have anything, then great. Perhaps if you don't have anything from that time, then you could always buy a little something. We were actually given this little toy by one of my partner's friends, because he very naughtily told her and a few other people, I think, that we were pregnant, even way before, you know, the time that you're meant to, the 12 weeks or whatever. But actually, you know, it was really, so it's been a lovely thing to keep afterwards, this card that she wrote to congratulate us on the pregnancy, and this little duck. And I kept my maternity exemption card, and also the actual pregnancy test from that pregnancy as well. And for me, they're just little things that, you know, that just honour that little life. They belong to him or her. I also, I never actually wrote anything specifically at the time, but I remember writing a text on WhatsApp to a group of my friends to tell them what had happened, because they obviously hadn't realised that I'd been pregnant. But I had this burning desire to tell my friends that I had been, because I didn't want that little tiny life to have gone without anyone knowing that it existed. So actually afterwards I asked my friends to send me that text so that I could print it out, and that, so I kept that too. And yeah, and I just in it I just talk about how, yeah, the physical side of it, and being in shock and being in hospital, and finding a quiet way to pay my respects to this tiny little entity. Talking about how I respected myself more while I was pregnant, catching my reflection and feeling proud and admiring it, and admiring my body for what it really was. And then I went on to talk about how I was always feeling anxious, washing my hands, etc. And then I described the actual experience of being in the hospital and the characters that were in this hospital. It was actually a hospital in Whitechapel in East London, and I can't remember if it was a weekday or a weekend, but there were some characters because it was the middle of the night. So there were quite a few drunk people on drugs, and just some actually quite hilarious things happened. There was what I think was an old Italian lady there who was actually, I think, in quite a bad mood at being wheeled around back and forth, and she, at one point, she was wheeled past us shouting, "I no sick, I no mad," and so I wrote about that, and about this, as I said before, this amazing nurse whose compassion and humanity in an otherwise clinical and matter-of-fact world, when she said to both me and my partner that it was okay to grieve about what we'd lost, to cry and to feel sad was okay. And then she said, get straight back on it once you've let yourself grieve, and you will be a mother. And the end of the letter just says, bye bye little seed of a soul, wherever you're going, it was nice to have you around. message is one of hope, really, because as you know, as I've said, I have my little baby boy, and I know a lot of women who also have had good outcomes after miscarriage. So if this is something that you've experienced, then please take heart in these stories. One of my good friends had, like me, one miscarriage and now has a son. Another friend had 2 miscarriages, one of which was twins, now has a daughter. And another friend had 6 miscarriages, and her 7th baby boy is now, I think, about 10 or 11 months old. And there are many more. Lots of ladies, old and young, have, when you actually ask them, will tell you that they have gone through it too, and now have children, grown-up children. So there is hope, even if it feels like right now, if this is something you're going through right now, it might feel like there isn't, but there is. I also want to give some practical tips, really, on keeping calm, really, because as I said, in that first pregnancy, I did suffer from anxiety, and in the second pregnancy, really didn't want to go through that again. Especially having had a miscarriage, you are on edge, or you can be, in any subsequent pregnancies. So it's just really important to look after your mental health and keep calm. And one of the biggest things that helped me was meditation. I found an Australian meditation coach called Bree Taylor Molyneaux, and I'll put some details in the caption. And she does amazing meditations specifically for pregnancy, and pregnancies of all different kinds, and for new mums, and established mums as well, I think. And it was brilliant. I used her meditation soundtracks every day, really, for a while during the early stages of my second and successful pregnancy. I also had acupuncture, which I would recommend as well. That was amazing for me in keeping calm and just feeling like I was doing something for myself, to look after myself. Obviously, the obvious ones: eat well, drink lots of water, that kind of thing. And you can't underestimate how important those basics are. You know, trying to get decent sleep, and a decent diet and exercise. Basics, but they really are the foundations for looking after yourself and having a successful pregnancy, especially after miscarriage. And also, I would say everyone has a different way of getting over this. For me, it was a mixture, really, of really feeling the emotion, being vulnerable, and really letting myself feel what I was going through, but also kind of throwing myself into being busy. I remember I went to a business meeting, I think the day after, because it was just important for me to kind of get out and not fester. But then at the same time, I would come home, and it comes in waves, like any grief. You feel okay for a moment, and then the wave of grief comes back, and it's okay to just let yourself cry. And if you have a partner, involve them in that too, because they're going through a lot as well, and just reach out for a hug. And it's okay for them to see you cry. So yeah, that's it for now, for this video. Please send your comments if you have any, or if you're going through this and you want some extra advice. And I'm sure, as lots of women have gone through this, then there will be a lot of people out there to give you advice and comfort. And yeah, bye for now, and look after yourself.